So now we're at Module 8, Risk Management and Sensitivity Analysis. This corresponds to Chapter 8 in the textbook on risk management. We're not doing all of the chapter, we're skipping portfolio analysis. And we're also adding in a new tool that's not in the chapter, sensitivity analysis. So an important principle is that profits are returns for taking risk. You don't make money without having some risk there available. So where risks are small, normally so are profits. Managing risks is therefore a matter of evaluating the alternatives that may give you higher returns without any more risk, reducing risk without reducing your profit, or finding a trade-off where you're comfortable. So it's a balance of returns with risk. The areas of risk to be managed include production risk. This is things like droughts, insect, disease, earthquakes, risks that you face in producing your product that might affect your yields or the quality of the product. Market or price risk are risks associated with changes in the price of your output sold or inputs purchased. So it could be that the cost of your fertilizer goes up, that's market risk, price risk, or it could be that what you sell your wheat for, or your corn, or your cattle, those prices may be going down, and so that's price risk, or market risk, both. Another risk you face is human or labor. Risks related to people you hire, if you have a family business or family members, family risks, things like that. If somebody with human risk, that's somebody may be injured, you may have an employee quit, all of those types of things. Legal institutional risk is risks associated with regulations, laws, and so if there's changes in laws, the regulations, zoning issues, you get sued, all those are legal or institutional risks. And finally, we have financial risk. Financial risk is related to your profitability, solvency, and liquidity. So solvency and liquidity are related to solvency is, are you bankrupt or not? Liquidity, do you have funds necessary to meet your obligations? So you have all these different risks that you're juggling in the area you're managing simultaneously as a manager. But it's important to understand that some risks may be more important to manage than others, and this could vary across different operations, and sometimes just even over time, you may have certain risks that just rise to the top. And everyone can improve their skill at managing risks. I've chosen with this module to take more of a conceptual approach and discussion to really just kind of think about what risks we're facing rather than how to calculate certain things. So I've gotten rid of all the calculations pretty much, and we're just kind of think about what does this mean. And so as you go through this, you may want to think about different operations that you're aware of. So few people are an expert in all areas, but sometimes there is help available, and so the consultants extension service has classes and other stuff sometime. So there's ways of, and sometimes even talking with your banker, your attorney and stuff. So during a price, we've had periods in the recent past where milk prices are very low for an extended period of time. Energy crisis where our gas prices have been elevated. During these periods, it may be that price risk is one of the biggest things you're managing. When we've had really high input costs, how do we deal with those? What are we doing? So the price risk can rise to the top. Human labor, death of a family member, an accident and health issue, an employee quitting. So sometimes these can be some of your most difficult things to manage. Recently, my brother has a farm, and he had 2 employees quit. One he had to fire in the spring during planting, and another one he quit and left suddenly. And so suddenly he was left with not enough people around during critical times. Another thing to think about is that when you have a family business, and say there's a family function like a wedding or a reunion or something, can everybody in that business leave at once? Sometimes if you have a death of a family member, that can make labor issues rise to the top. My dad had a guy that leases land from him, and he was driving up to Island Park a few years back, and a rock fell down and hit him through his pickup and killed him. And he was divorced, and his oldest son was, or his oldest child was a son who was 17. And so that was mid-August, I believe. And so immediately there were issues of, it was just in the midst of harvest or just getting ready to harvest and stuff. And so without the owner there, the highest risk there was, how can we deal with that and get the crops harvested and take care of that? And different people stepped in and stuff happened. But we don't always think about these things happening, but I think sometimes you need to plan for them. One of their issues there was even getting legal access so somebody could sign the checkbook to meet payroll. Because if you couldn't meet payroll and you didn't have your employees there to harvest your crop, you were in trouble. Sometimes legal or regulatory issues rise to the top. Grazing lawsuits, loss of BLM permits, new farm bill provisions, zoning issues. And so different things can cause those legal issues to be the most important at the time. Sometimes you could be sued for something. Financial, it may be that you're in a bankruptcy situation or facing that. You're trying to obtain financing and you've had something happen. You've got to meet your family living obligations. Sometimes it can even be in a positive way, but you need to do estate planning, transitional planning of the operation. So estate issues may rise to the top and become the most important thing at a certain time. So during different periods, all of these may have times or for certain operations where they really are the most important thing and so more attention's paid to them. Drought or crickets can be one reason why production risk might be the most important thing. So now we want to think about ways to manage those risks. One is to just avoid doing a risky behavior. If you have two crops and one of them's risky and the other one isn't, maybe we do a less risky crop. Seed varieties that aren't as prone to frost damage. Reduce the risk. Change some of our methods so that we have less risk there. Reducing risk could be something like having safety training so everybody does things in a more safe manner. Shift the risk to others. This one of the primary things here is insurance. Instead of you taking the risk, it costs something, but instead of you taking the risk, the insurance company now is bearing that risk. So your operation has less risk. Or increase your ability to cope. And this can be maintaining flexibility and keeping reserves. So sometimes with certain crops you have a narrow window to get them harvested, or they're like your hay. Once it's the hay's been cut, if it's rained on before it gets baled, the quality goes way down. So it could be that you maintain flexibility with a little bit or reserves of equipment, so you can harvest or get the hay baled in a narrow period of time, so we have less issues with rain. So all these different types of risk, we can do different things, and so we can avoid, reduce, shift to others, and flexibility reserves. For all of these, it may really make sense. Not all of these may make as much sense as others, but I think it's useful since we are just thinking about really what risks do we face and how to cope with them. So production, one way to avoid it is don't plant high-risk crops. You may put an irrigation system in to reduce the risk. So we're not as subject to drought because we have an irrigation system. Plastic row covers or plastic mulch might reduce the risk associated with frost damage. We could buy crop insurance so that the insurance company bears the risk. You might have extra equipment to harvest in a narrow window as a flexibility. Price or market risk. You can have crops with less price risk. Some crops in general are going to have more variability in their prices than others. Reduce it, markets with less price risk. And I realize I've put the same thing in here. And that really is somewhat the same, but it's what I was thinking here. Instead of crops, change your crop but a market. And so it may be that by doing some direct marketing or finding some people that you sell your products to that have less risk, that can reduce your risk. For example, sometimes you sell your hay to one person that may be facing financial difficulty, and so you don't know if you're going to get the money from them. And so selling it to people, better customers, may have less risk. You can have contracts on those prices to shift it to others. Lower debt reserves gives you some flexibility there. Human, don't do risky stuff. Avoid it. Reduce it. Have safety practices, training, safety training, so that reduces the risk of injury. Liability, insurance shifts it to somebody else. And sometimes you can hire certain services instead of doing them yourself. And your flexibility is that you have cross-training. So if you have one, instead of just having one employee that knows how to do something, if you have multiple employees, then you have less risk. Another one would be legal. And so avoid it, get legal opinions before you enter into certain contracts. And so you can avoid risky ones. Reduce, have signed contracts so that you have something to prove if something happens. Liability insurance. Reserves, lower debt loads. Financial, avoid, don't have risky enterprises. Reduce, lower your debt load so that you have some less loan payments that you need to make. Shift to others, again, that insurance. And then your flexibility, more liquidity. So if you have more liquidity there, you have more ability to cope with those downturns in the market. So here's one crop alfalfa, and it's production per acre for Box Elder, Millard, and Uinta counties. And this is over 1984 to about 2003. And you can see that you have some variability, but not a lot. Millard County down Delta looks like it's the highest, but probably less risk. And Uinta County has higher variability. See how it's going from up there clear to down here? And it's doing that a few times. So it has a little bit higher variability. So it's a little more risky. And Uinta County's out in vernal area. So a little more risky in vernal than it might be in Delta to produce hay. But now you can see production risks for dryland wheat. Look how much higher these variabilities are. So you have a lot more production risk for dryland wheat than we had for alfalfa here, no matter what county you're in. And it looks like probably Millard County might have the most variability because it has the lowest lows, the highest highs. So the most variability there, the most risk. And maybe Box Elder has the least risk, but all pretty risky here. So risks in agriculture. Total risk is a combination of all of those different types of risk. Higher risks in one area mean you probably need to balance that with lower risks in others. In agriculture, we have a lot of business risk. Business risk is the price, production, your market risk, your human risk, your legal risk. And so because of that, you need to balance that with lower financial risks. So in agriculture, we would expect lower debt levels than by other institutions or other industries. So, for example, in agriculture, we limit that debt to equity to be a 1-to-1 ratio. However, other industries that face a lot less business risk, that those profits are more assured, they may have debt to equity ratios that are 3 or 4. And so it really kind of just depends on your industry and knowing and managing the risks that you face there.